have your attention? Please welcome TechCrunch General Manager and Editor-in-Chief, Connie Loizis.
Hi, good morning all. Thank you for coming to day 2 of Disrupt. It's great to see a full house here. So much in store for you again today. I'm really excited to say that Dario Amodei of one of the buzziest AI companies is coming on right after I get out of here. It's also day 2 of the battlefield competition. It is getting real. The companies that we have are just fantastic, so make sure that you stay around and watch that. Also, I'm really excited to watch 2 interviews later today with J.B. Straubel of Redwood Materials and Kyle Vogt of Cruise, whose company is the talk of San Francisco. So a lot going on. We also have a SaaS stage today. We've got an AI stage. You're not going to want to miss anything. To get things kicked off, I'm going to hand things off to our U.S. Managing Editor, Daryl Etherington. Thanks, guys.
May I have your attention? Please welcome TechCrunch Managing Editor, Daryl Etherington.
Morning, everybody. All right. Everyone's looking bright and bushy. So let's see. We got tons of stuff today. We got lots and lots of stages. It's so many stages. I can't remember them, so I am going to read them. We have the builder stage, where you get practical advice about how to build your startup. We have the fintech stage. You know what that's about? Space, sustainability, AI, software as a service, hardware, and security. Today, specifically, we have the builder stage, so more great content over there. We have the AI stage and the software as a service stage. Also, lots of opportunity to network. Go out there, find your co-founders, find your investors, build companies. Check out the breakouts and roundtables. Those are on the 2nd floor. Check out the Deal Flow Cafe, which is over there. You can get great coffee in there, and also Deal Flow, I guess. That's for investor badges and founder badges only. And then you can also stop by the Redwood Materials booth and recycle your old electronics. If you have any of those around, maybe you bought a new iPhone, you're gonna get it tomorrow, you can just throw out your old iPhone, 2 days, no phone. It's fine, meet people. But first up, we have a very exciting session with Dario Amodei on AI. He is the founder and CEO of Anthropic, which has built Claude, one of the most amazing generative AI chatbots out there, being used by all kinds of companies, and he'll talk about that a bit. And he's going to be joined by Devin Coldaway, who will be your moderator for this session. So enjoy.
Dario, thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
I know you have to catch your flight, so we'll get right to it. But we're going to start at sort of a cosmic scale here. AI isn't new. We're talking about like 100-year level history going back to the 50s and 60s and probably ahead into the 2030s, 40s, 50s, maybe beyond. Can you kind of just locate us really quick on this, in the grand scheme, on this century-long story of AI?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, I wasn't around all the way back since the 50s and 60s,
sorry,
of course.
I didn't realize. Okay.
But you know, where I think I can say, where I think I have had a front seat to a lot of what's happened is in the last 10 years. And in the last 10 years, you know, we've discovered that neural nets actually work. I mean, I remember going to an undergrad class at Stanford back in, 2006, and neural nets were on the syllabus, and the instructor just said, "Oh yeah, well let's just skip that. These don't work."
Yeah, right. You're on neural nets.
But the last 10 years, there's been this remarkable increase in the scale that we've used to train neural nets, and we keep scaling them up, and they keep working better and better. I was kind of involved back when I was at OpenAI at studying the scaling, and have been able to predict over and over again, doing GPT-2, GPT-3, and then the further scaling that we've done at Anthropic to predict that this scaling would continue to work and the models would continue to get better and better. And that's the basis of my feeling that what we're going to see in the next 2, 3, 4 years. What we see today is going to pale in comparison to that, because I've seen that so many times. I've seen that inductive process so many times.
Right. Well, predict me this. Are we going to have a quadrillion parameter model next year?
Quadrillion parameter model. The scaling laws don't really suggest that, and that would be a lot more than the number of synapses in the human brain. So I don't think it'll get that big, but the models will certainly get bigger. If you want to get technical about it, they tend to go with the square of the amount of compute. You increase the amount of compute by n squared, and you get a factor of n for data and a factor of n for size of the model.
Gotcha. So no quadrillion, but maybe 100 trillion.
More than we have now.
Okay, more than we have now. You heard it here first. So today's language models, as you mentioned, they sort of really took off in the last few years. And a huge part of that is because of the transformer or attention method or technique that was invented basically in 2017. And we've just been scaling and scaling, as you said, since then. When will we reach the limits of the transformer-based approach?
Yeah, I mean, you can never quite be sure, right? I mean, it's entirely empirical.
I'll need you to be sure.
You've scaled up the last factor of 10, and what happens when you go to the next factor of 10? You don't know for sure, but I've seen the last 7 zeros be added on to the the number of flops you train on, and so my guess is that it's going to keep happening with quite high likelihood. Now, several things could happen. It could stop at some point. Something that could block us is the quantity of data for various reasons. I don't think quantity of data is going to block us, but there's always some chance that it'll do so. We could invent something that works better, that's more efficient than the transformer. If that happens, I think that'll just make the curve steeper and make it go on for longer. A lot of the scaling trends we've seen with previous models before the transformer, like the LSTM or the RNN, they scale as well. They have the same curve. They're just offset. They're not as efficient. And so we could discover something that's even more efficient. But even if we don't, I think the current scaling is gonna go on for at least another 4 years or so.
I saw an interesting talk at CVPR by Yijin Choi, who's at University of Washington. She thought that we should identify the limits first if we can, and then work inside those or around those. Do you think that that's possible? I mean, as an example, she gave that LLMs can't really multiply large numbers very well. I don't know if that's important for most people when they're talking I don't ask, Claude, like, hey, do this long division for me or whatever. But do you think that we should be trying to identify those sort of fundamental limits or obstacles?
Yeah, so I'm not sure there are any.
Oh, no?
And also to the extent that there are, I'm not sure how. I'm not sure that there's a good way to measure them. So to take your example of multiplication in particular, on one hand, as these models have scaled up, they have gotten better. Claude can not all the time, but I think more than 50% of the time multiply 3-digit numbers or so if it's prompted in the right way.
Yeah, like me.
And we've seen, it's more than I can do in my head for sure, right? And we're not giving Claude any equivalent of paper. And there have been papers that show that when you fine-tune models on the particular problem of multiplying, they can multiply very large numbers, again, up to the limits of what they're able to hold in memory, which is the limit of any computational system. So I think those long years of scaling experience have taught me to be very skeptical, but also skeptical of the claim that an LLM can't do anything, or that if it wasn't prompted or fine-tuned or trained in a slightly different way, that it wouldn't be able to do anything. So I tend to be very skeptical about these claims about hard limits. That's not a claim that LLMs can do anything now or that they'll be able to do absolutely anything at some point in the future. I'm just skeptical of these hard limits.
Skeptics.
I'm skeptical of the skeptics.
Yes, I know.
Not
There's probably a word for that.
necessarily bullish on everything, but
Yes.
skeptical of the skeptics.
So you run a giant secretive AI research outfit with hundreds of millions of dollars and a global, well, we won't say agenda, but ambitions. I can't be the only one wondering sort of what's that like? Just kind of fundamentally, what do you do all day?
Yeah, I mean, I would describe it as a mix of things that are very normal and things that are very unusual, right? It's a bit of an unusual experience, right? So half the day it's kind of again fairly normal things that any startup encounters, like how do we get the latency down on serving our models? Do we have enough capacity? I'm trying to recruit this head of product. I have to talk to these prospective customers and tell them about what all the great things about Claude are. And I think the other half of it, can be very unusual because of where we think the technology is going. So, I was just a couple months ago testifying in Congress, and the main thing we discussed is 2 or 3 years from now, how much potential is there for language models to produce, bioweapons, something like a super plague? And, similarly, we, speak to folks in the government a lot, and there are a lot of concerns about, will AI fundamentally change the balance of power between nations, right? That's something that kind of transcends the ordinary commercial question. So there's something a bit surreal about ping-ponging back between those two. I've never really seen a field or industry that works in that way.
And what was your those talks you were talking about going to these hearings? I caught your testimony; it was very interesting, and the other folks very good as well. What would be your sort of short takeaways from that? What are you hoping that Congress took away from that, or the executive branch?
Yeah. So I think the thing that I've been emphasizing, both to Congress and in other settings, is the importance of these catastrophic risks that are going to arise over the next few years. So for various reasons, kind of in line with the scaling, I've had this view that in 2 or 3 years, as we scale and modify language models, they're going to get to the point where they can do a pretty wide fraction of the things that an educated or expert human can do, and that'll mostly be good. Like, that's great. That's driving lots of customers for us. The promise of that is part of what makes people excited. But skill exists in many areas, and in particular, adversarial or malicious skill is a type of skill. And so, if the models aren't controlled in the right way, then they may be capable of some very bad things. So I think I've encouraged the regulators. There are many issues that we should attend to with respect to AI, but to attend specifically to the kind of catastrophic risks, think about the worst downsides, because mitigating the worst downsides, I think, is the key to actually achieving the upsides of the technology. If something really bad and catastrophic happens, then there might be broad bans on the technology. So we need to make sure, both because it's inherently important, but also to achieve the upside, we need to make sure that we address these in particular. So that has always been our message. I think the phrase I used was testing an auditing regime. It's a little like airplanes and cars, right? These are machines that are capable of wonderful things, really useful to humanity, but also dangerous. They can kill people, and so they have to be tested properly before they're released.
Gotcha. And I know that there was some criticism around some of these talks. Some have been open, like your testimony, and some are sort of behind closed doors. Some have said, like, well, it feels like you're asking the foxes to design the hen house a little bit. Where you're bringing in these, heads of multi-billion-dollar companies and saying, like, well, how should we, what laws should we put into place? And someone says, like, well, you should definitely protect our growing monopoly, for one thing, and prevent any competitors from arising. They don't say it like that, but you can read between the lines. Is that what do you think that that's correct, or is there somebody else we should include?
I mean, so there's always, we should include a wide set of people, and there's kind of always these tensions around regulation, right? Where the people building the technology are usually the most knowledgeable about the technology, but may or may not have the right incentives. And so we've at least kind of, tried to give advice that targets the catastrophic risks without doing these kind of broader things, which again can protect incumbents if they're not done in the right way. But ultimately, the government should make their own decisions. They should consult a wide set of people. They shouldn't just listen to large industrial players or even startups. But I would say that the focus on catastrophic risks and large models, we're not interested. I can't speak for the other companies, but we're not interested in restricting experimentation with small scale open source, in restricting innovation. There are going to be a very small number of players who are capable of making the very largest models.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that those large models are tested properly. I don't think that helps incumbents. I think that just protects society.
Yeah. I'm talking with Meredith Whitaker tomorrow. She recently wrote a great paper with some other people talking about how open AI is not really that open. It's restricted in its source, it's restricted in its access, it's restricted in, for instance, and in the resources that you just said, in who can make it and who can run it. And whether you like it or not, if you want to run a large language model, you have to involve Google, Amazon, Microsoft, somebody. Do you think Anthropic's models are open enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think we tend to think in terms of, making our models safe and making our safety research available and open to others. So, our focus more than anything is on safety. And the thing we've been very insistent on is, we do a lot of work on interpreting neural nets. We do a lot of work on sculpting the values of neural nets, and we publish all of that work even when it doesn't help us commercially, right? Even when someone copying it can allow them to do some of the same things we do, because we value so much that being able to diffuse into the ecosystem. So that's the form of openness we value most, because it targets people building the right kind of safe systems and the ecosystem becoming better.
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems that a truly open AI may not even be possible right now, but we can certainly try in various ways. So speaking of which, your biggest rival, I think it's fair to say, is OpenAI, famously not open. But they do have a lot of talent. They've got a lot of customers. They've got Microsoft as an enforcer. How do you close the gap? How do you leapfrog OpenAI and become the new head of all AI, Lord of AI on this earth?
Well, I don't know if we're trying to become Lord of. That
well, I think maybe
ominous,
you should.
But let me at least paint a picture of the position we're in. So I was at OpenAI for 5 years. I was VP of research. We drove all the research that did GPT-2, GPT-3, co-inventor of RL from human feedback, and of course the scaling laws, which are driving all this.
Thank you, by the way.
When we left, we took what I think were some of the most talented people with us. But we've only been around for a little over 2.5 years.
Yeah.
OpenAI has been around 7, 8 years. Other orgs have been around even longer. In that time, we've managed to raise $1.5 billion, which is a lot, but still, factor 10x.
I mean, it's kind of a lot.
It's all relative.
It is, isn't it?
Our team is much smaller, and yet we've managed to hold our own,
Yeah.
and we've managed to build a model that is better than GPT-4 for some things, and in the ballpark for a very wide range of things. So what we've managed to do in a very, very small amount of time. I mean, this is what I always tell investors and customers. We have really very, very radically been able to do more with less. And I think relatively soon we're going to be in a position where the playing field is more equal and we're able to do more with more. And I think we're going to do very well compared to any other player at that time. Mm-hmm. One thing I would say, our focus particularly has been on enterprise customers. And I think within that area, our performance has already been very strong. And I think is getting stronger every day.
And what are they actually using it for? We always hear these companies have adopted AI, and then you never hear about it again, or they're like, yeah, we're testing it here and there and this and that. What exactly are they doing?
So we found with Claude in particular, our sweet spot so far has often been kind of knowledge work and professional services. So we've seen a lot of use cases in the legal case. One example of that is LexisNexis.
Invent me a precedent.
Yeah, or hopefully not hallucinating, but to help you correctly understand the content of a contract. Finance and financial services, a lot of those are deployed internally because that is often how the finance industry works. Things like accounting, we've powered some coding assistants like SourceGraph's coding assistant, productivity things like Notion and Slack. So that'll give you a flavor of it. The reliability of the model, the 100K context, which is about 75,000 words, analyzing documents, again, these kind of information manipulation and knowledge use cases, people generally choose us for those. So I don't know, we're doing very well in this area. It's too early to say, but it's quite possible that, Claude 2, with all its relatively expensive costs, may even pay for itself. Depends when we launch Claude 3 and stop using Claude 2, but not out of the question at all.
Right, and Claude 3 is the quadrillion parameter model we were talking about earlier.
Claude 3 is some number of parameters that's more than Claude 2, and some amount of data that's more than Claude 2, and some algorithms that are better than Claude 2.
Right.
I can't say anymore.
Speaking of the data, does Anthropic use any SCI Hub or Library Genesis data in its?
We don't use those data sets.
Okay.
For reference, those are some data sets against which I believe there was a court injunction telling people not to use them, so we don't use them.
Yes, and authors too, of course. But it is kind of an open question with others. Speaking not necessarily of others, but you're talking about OpenAI. You spent a lot of time there. What do you think about Sam?
What do I think about Sam Altman? I mean, I don't know what to say to that question.
Well, you're already starting. Just go ahead.
You know, look. There's several players in the space. All of these players are, you know, I think are at least trying to do the right thing, and they have different views about how they're going to do that right thing. You know, Anthropic's view has always been, and you know, I think I said it on a recent podcast. Personalities, you know, I think people are too focused on personalities. I tend not to think in terms of personalities. I tend to think in terms of incentives. And what Anthropic has always tried to do is create a race to the top. Do something, and then do something good, and then that forces your competitors to do the same thing. One thing I'll say, one thing I've learned, not just from this, but from many things, you know, it can be pretty ineffective to, you know, argue with your boss or argue with someone and say, your company shouldn't do X, it should do Y.
Especially if your boss is Sam Altman.
A much more effective thing to do is, I'm starting a company, we're going to do X, we'll see how it works.
Yeah.
And if X is working and people are like, oh, these are the safe guys, they're doing X, then pretty soon everyone else is going to be doing X as well. And we found that with interpretability, we found that with work on red teaming, we're starting to find that with security. Just yesterday we released a responsible scaling plan, which is our plan for how to scale safely. Obviously we want to scale quickly to be competitive, but we want to do it in a way that you know, preserves, you know, the model being safe against these catastrophic risks. And so it's a system that lays out different danger levels for models. You know, models, if they pass a hypothetical future model passes a certain test, it becomes a catastrophic, you know, we declare it a catastrophic risk. There's stronger security protections you have to put in place. There's stronger red teaming. You even start to get the national security community involved. And you know, we're the first company to have done this. We just released it yesterday. But I think that over time we're going to see that other folks will need to have an answer to this. More and more it'll be asked, well, you know, this makes sense. Why aren't you doing it? And you know, often this takes years to play out. Sometimes it happens immediately. But you know, I think about creating the right incentives for the ecosystem. And if you create the right incentives for the ecosystem, you know, it doesn't matter the personalities that are running specific companies. The right things happen because the right things are incentivized to happen, and that is our hope.
Right. No comment on Sam Altman. No, I really like your perspective actually. That leaving and doing your own thing is at the very heart of everything that TechCrunch and the companies that we love to cover do. Like, that's the philosophy at the heart of a startup, is like, well, I don't want to ask my boss at Google or whatever if I can do this and maybe get it done. It's like, I can do it right now. I will leave and raise hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's a difficult part, though, that last part. Your investors, have they pushed for any timelines for returns? Or do they know this is kind of a long play?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is aware that language models are costing more and more, but also generating more and more revenue. So everyone kind of understands that, you know, there's a lot of potential for the field in the future, and you know, that can make fundraising easier. But at the same time, like I said before, like, you know, again, without giving exact numbers, which I can't, the plausible revenues that you can imagine getting from the current generation of Claude, you know, minus the inference costs and the training costs, like, those things aren't wildly out of line with each other.
The delta is...
The math isn't, you know, like a factor of 100 off, or maybe even or even a factor of 10 off.
Go on. What factor exactly?
Sorry. You know, right. You can kind of see the end line on these things, right?
Yeah.
It potentially makes sense as a financial proposition, even more so if you consider where these models are going in the future, which I think the smart investors are aware of how things are scaling and where they're going, and not just looking at the commercial dissemination of the current models, where I think the potential is already very high. But the real potential, you know, instead of you know, oh, I'm hiring a model to, you know, interpret this one course case or something. Well, I'm hiring a model to, you know, to act as a co-lawyer for my lawyer. That's going to be a much bigger pie than we see today.
And did you I feel like you've raised several large sort of tranches. Were these meaningfully different sort of groups of investors or people with meaningfully different expectations?
Yeah, I think early on when we basically just had the team, we tended to raise more from from individuals, from folks who were particularly passionate about AI safety, and we've always been very sure to like kind of hold true to the expectations and the hopes of those folks. As time has gone on, and we built clusters, we built models. Again, there's been a more practical prospect of a return. So we've had other investors in the mix at the same time, and I think it's actually been a useful process of getting everyone on the same page of how can we accomplish all of these kind of different goals at once. These very disparate goals don't necessarily need to be contradictory, right? There is some tension between them, but we can make them all work if we force ourselves to go through the exercise and confront the potential tensions between them.
Right. And speaking of tensions, where did sort of Sam Bankman-Fried fit into this whole ecosystem of investors? I think we're all kind of curious how that played out.
Yeah. So of course, when Sam invested in our Series B, we were of course unaware of unaware.
I do not mean to allege any crime. Yes. We're all curious. Like, I mean, the guy was everywhere. His money was everywhere, and especially.
Yeah. I mean, he represented himself as someone who cared a lot about AI safety and made big bets. Obviously, he was different than what he represented himself as. Those shares were non-voting shares, and now they're being sold by the bankruptcy estate. So that's pretty much all there is to say about it.
Okay. Did you ever meet him?
Did I ever meet him? Yeah, I met him a few times.
Okay. Interesting guy. What do you think about Sam Bankman-Fried? No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We only have just a minute left. I know you have to run to a thing, but let me just get a quick, on a scale of 1 to 10. How dumb is the discourse around AGI, artificial general intelligence? For those who are not familiar with the thing, I know you have opinions on this.
Yeah. So I don't like the term. I mean, there was a point like 10 years ago where I think actually that term was more useful 10 years ago than it is now, even though we're kind of closer to some of the things that it's alluding to. So 10 years ago was like, you could point at this point in the distance, and it seemed like one thing. But now I think we got to this point where what we thought was a point is actually very complicated, right? So there's different concepts. One is you can imagine, okay, where do we get a model where it gets to the point where you can hire it as a professional, co-pilot, as a lawyer or financial advisor. It has the skills of most educated humans. I don't think we're very far away from that at all. That could be 2 or 3 years. Then there's all this stuff about the model's gonna fill the Earth with nanobots, or build a Dyson sphere around the sun or something like that. And I wouldn't say that's never going to happen. Science fiction is about the future, and sometimes science fiction things happen eventually. But that's just a very, very different, not necessarily the same concept. So I think people are mushing together things that are very practical with things that are very speculative. Not that we might not get from one to the other in relatively short period of time, but I think we're on much more solid ground talking about when our model is going to be able to do most things that humans can do. Versus kind of the societal implications of that, or where that might lead us technologically, and kind of both are called AGI, and I think it's kind of not a very useful discourse. So I don't know, 8 or 9 on the
8 or 9,
8 or 9 on the dumb scale.
We'll go with a 8.5. All right, and that's all the time we've got. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.